folks, welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is a live edition of the Jake Feinberg Show, comedy on Power Talk. Please go to our website, powertalk.live. Download our free app to your smartphone so you can stream all of our live local programming, including Solomon on Blast, the Jim Parisi Show, and yours truly, the Jake Feinberg Show. Can't thank you enough for making us part of your day today. And just coming off the road, 6 days on the road, traveling around, meeting family I never knew I had, and also getting a chance to see incredible live music provided by my soul brother Dan Horn and company on the bandstand with Circles Around the Sun. And I noticed that there was a cat that was opening for them, and I was not that hip to, I wasn't hip to him at all when I saw him, and then all of a sudden he just blew my mind open with this solo performance, spinning this web of melodic music through through picking and through very creative looping, and also being charismatic on the bandstand. I think he wasn't necessarily expecting to get the call for this tour, but because there's still with a heavy heart, this was a kind of a tribute tour to the late great singer-songwriter Neil Casal. And when I saw my guest performing, I sort of felt like, well, this is sort of the passing of the torch, or the proverbial baton in some ways, to my generation and future generations and new musical leaders and vocabulary building on the bandstand. William Tyler, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Jake, it's such a pleasure. Good to hear from you.
I did not realize that we're basically the same age. I didn't realize that, so, to your credit, you've aged very well, because I look a lot older than I am. But, I was hoping you could, I know you were just, immersed in, folk and country music, and your folks were very decorated writers, but, you on your own, was there a time in your life when you realized the spiritual quality of music? What I mean by that, it could be anything. It could be, leaving your physical body on the bandstand. It could be walking off the bandstand. Someone said, "How'd you do that?" You say, "I had no idea." But there's only two letters that separate magic and music, and I wasn't sure if you could point to a time early in your career when you tapped into that.
Well, I feel like as a child, I was around music a lot, as you mentioned, because my parents worked in the country music industry. And I think just the process of it was pretty fascinating to me. But I wasn't attracted to country music per se. I definitely had some pretty important formative moments as a kid listening to a lot of still am. So I collected a lot of folkways type related things, Woody Guthrie records, the old songs, and I just, the way you get lost in music, kind of sitting in your room, I was a pretty introverted kid. I think that part of it grabbed me very, very quickly. Now, what you're talking about, kind of the spiritual kind of transitional aspect of performing, I remember the first time I was in my high school band, and we had our first gig, and I was so scared, that trembling, disassociative kind of anxiety that stage fright is. And I remember I broke a string on our first song, and there was kind of that moment where I was just time stood still, and you could almost feel everybody in the room being like, how are they going to get through this?
Right.
And I don't know. I can't remember if somebody let me borrow a guitar, or I took a break and restrung it, and then just got back up there and just, totally winged it and went through it. And I do remember kind of after the fact, kind of feeling wow, how did we do that? And then the next day, all these kids at school that were kind of wouldn't give me the time of day before were sort of you know, to checking you out, you know, like you kind of, you know, that's
Like,
the
how
thing
did
with
that cat
music
do
is
that, man? That was magic, man. He got through
well,
it. Yeah.
there's a magic about I mean, I think it's that thing where you're, you know, there's something about performing, and I think when you're in school, and I think when you're a teenager especially, and you know everybody's feeling each other out, and you're ruled by insecurity and hormones, and you don't even know what's going on with the world. It's
Right.
like you respond to, you know, a performance achievement. So whether it's sports or whether it's music or whether it's theater, you know, it's like those are the things that you sort of get an instant reward out of. You know, as I've grown older, it's an interesting thing you mentioned because, you know, I'm pretty frank when I talk with people about, you know, I deal with generalized anxiety problems and OCD issues and all this stuff, but like when I'm on stage, I'm so calm. It's like almost the most focused, calm place for me that I can be. And I don't know what that is, you know, but I just kind of go with it.
Well, I mean, you know, you're kind of preaching to the choir here, but I think, I mean, I'm not on the bandstand, but I mean, we all struggle with that kind of. At least I do as well, and I think that it's your yogic state. I mean, most importantly, probably you spend so much time. I mean, it's the loneliest 23 hours of the day when you're not on the bandstand, and you know, you're thinking.
It really is.
It really is, man.
Even when you're in
yeah.
Even when you're in a van with a bunch of people. I mean, it's not lonely that way. No, you're right.
No. What I'm trying to say is that, like, when you get to, what's great is you have all this stuff bubbling around inside, and when you are able to get it out of your system and potentially help raise the collective consciousness of the room you're playing, then that's a yogic state. That's a meditative state. I mean, that's kind of and that's the hardest part of being on the road, and there's just a whole can of worms in that. But I wanted to ask you, when you mentioned you were intrigued, not necessarily with country music, but the process. Was it the process of songwriting? Could you go a little bit deeper on that?
Yeah. I think the process of songwriting, you know, it's like when you grow up around it, it's almost like watching your folks, you know, cook dinner or something. It's
right.
like, I mean, for me, it was very organic watching my dad, you know, write songs, and even with other people. I got pretty hooked. I remember when I was pretty young, like 12 or 13, like he took me to the recording studio the first time and was watching him interact with other musicians. And man, that's when I was hooked, you know, just seeing the kind of, you know, kind of the weird, like sort of no time, all time kind of, you know, there's no windows in a studio, all these guys kind of talking and like, sitting down, putting on headphones, the microphones, and just the magic of the sound and the technical aspects of it. That's really what hooked me, I think. So that's what I mean by process. Being exposed to that at an early age. And then, like, you know, when I was like 14, I got a 4-track recorder, and I started making tapes and stuff in my bedroom. And I just think that part of it never.
Did you? I mean, so like with your pops, I mean, like. Was he essentially bringing in, what was his role as a traditional, like someone who would bring a song to another person to record, or was he actually recording his own tunes as a leader? I guess what I'm trying to get at is, you know, it's this idea of leadership, nonverbal leadership. I mean, Coltrane used to go up to Miles and say, when he first joined Miles Davis, he kept going up to him and saying, you know, what do you want me to play? What do you want me to play? And Miles kept turning his back on him. And Train realized after a while that actually Miles just wanted him to be himself. He hired him to do what he did. And was your dad, when you saw that magic, what kind of leadership style did your dad have, and what did he have nonverbal leadership style?
Well, that's it. Yeah, that's a really good question, because my dad's not. He's not what he's. I would say he's more kind of a traditional songwriter / A&R producer type. You know, like he's not a performer.
Right.
He's definitely not a technical musician. I mean, he knows kind of the rudiments of guitar, but I mean, he would be the first to admit, or not admit, he would be the first to say, like, I'm not necessarily a musician. I think when he would be in there producing a session, there'd be a lot of non-verbal. I think he was just good at getting good musicians in there. I think that's like he knows a good song, and he knows a good singer, and he knows how to get the right people in the room. You know, if you saw that documentary Muscle Shoals, that's a lot about Rick Hall.
Yeah.
There's my dad's not. I mean, he's not as necessarily like as rough hewn as Rick Hall, but like he's kind of that type guy, that sort of old school Southern, like knows a good song, knows how to get the right people in the room. But I do think that relates directly to what you're saying about Coltrane and Miles. And I, honestly, one of the things that across all genres, the thing that makes me gravitate towards Miles, just whenever I'm out of ideas, is just that thing you just said. He was such a genius at getting people in the room to be themselves and play in and around that. And that's why those records are. I mean, he never repeated himself because of that. He just always knew how to reinvent himself through collaboration with people that he just inherently trusted to be themselves in their studio and on stage.
Well, he also, like, one thing that I noticed with you in the Sacramento show, more so than the Chapel show, Miles' genius also was that he understood that the silence was the music as well. You know, it was actually the notes you didn't play. And, like, at one point at the end of the performance, you brought everything down. You stopped playing the guitar, and you faded out one loop, and then you faded out another. Then it was down to, like, one, like, pulse. And then it was gone, and it was gone. And, you know, in times like these, when, you know, when the significance of music has changed so much in our culture, there was a lot of, you know, bar talk, and, you know, people weren't necessarily completely locked in to the performance itself. But yeah, I think there's a combination of things that go on with someone like Miles, or a leadership style, and, you know, I some of it has to do with just, you know, this idea of, I remember, you can riff on this any way you want, but Hampton Hawes was a great piano player. Actually, he was the last cat that John F. Kennedy pardoned in, like, 1961. He was a really titanic player, and he said, you know, man, you know, he was talking to one of his drummers, and he was like, you know, man, you spent so much time intellectualizing the music, and you haven't played a damn note. You know, it's like something about just play. I mean, I just find that we're Gen Xers basically, and then obviously younger generations seem to be so consumed with perfection and having to talk things out and getting the perfect bass drum sound. And I understand you don't want it to sound sloppy or messy, but there's just something about the fortitude and the quality of just hitting it and not marrying any type of genre, but just getting close to it and stop talking about it. I mean, did you reach a point where, you know, you just kind of learned, you learned that in your own way that you just needed to play and stop talking about what you were going to play, and this is more in the band context, less more in a solo context. You can riff on that any way you want.
Yeah, I mean, I had the benefit of, when I was a pretty young up-and-coming guitar player, of I would be in there were a couple of producers that I would sort of work on and off with, and I would always kind of be the guy in there, sort of try to think of what position you know, compare it to. Like definitely not point guard. I mean, like, I was like I wouldn't be the lead guitar player, and even when I was playing electric, I might be kind of the shadow guy.
Sure,
but
sure.
I did a lot of rhythm and, like, lead rhythm hybrid, because I'm not, like, I mean, I'll be the first to admit, like, I can't
Yeah, nobody. Let me just be.
left,
I know what you're going to say. I don't even care that you're not John McLaughlin because you know what? I don't even want to see somebody wanking it on the bandstand. I'd much rather
right.
see a hybrid cat. But go ahead. Yeah, continue.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, like that's. I mean, I can. I just have a particular style that like is very like it's. I feel it's very individualistic. But what I was going to say is that I was definitely in situations with a lot of singers and like more traditional kind of older country cats who I think were sort of like kind of would hint around at exactly what you just said of like, don't let the notes talk too much. Like don't you don't have to say everything, and like even the guys who are like when I did start getting really, really into country guitar, the guys who like I really gravitated towards, I mean, even somebody like Chet Atkins,
Sure.
like, I mean, he's pretty understated like 90% of the time. I mean, he can definitely shred, but like if anything, his whole vibe was like kind of like not too many notes.
Right. Dude, because what he played, the significance of the notes took on a greater significance because you weren't flailing around with too much language. I mean, I think that's
exactly.
I think you're just innately built like that, or you're not in some way as a musician. But did you find that like working with I don't know, I mean, just to me, it's one of those things where it's like there are so many iconic tunes, Isaac Hayes tunes, and like where like the Bee Gees were like going to Isaac and being like, how did you get that one thing on this one tune? And we have this huge soundboard with all this technology, and we can't get that sound. And apparently the microphone fell off the stand and hit the amp or something like that, and magically and it's like I look at it and I say like that is I just wonder how you deal in today's world. I mean, there's a folk vibe coming from you, and obviously
Sure.
you play electric, you're plugged in, and there's a gypsy quality when you plug in. But how do you balance using technology but not being overly consumed by it? I mean, the amount of cats that I talk to that are basically our age or that are quote unquote leaders, they keep cranking out albums, okay? And it's like, that's great, but if you're not getting stuff out of your system on the bandstand, then then those albums will just sit on the shelf and collect dust. And that's why it was so cool to see you play live, because ultimately you keep honing your individual voice. You're obviously, it's how you use the technology. You have a lot of technology up there, but you're also a minimalist because of the folk aesthetic. So how do you balance it so you're not immersed, and this can go for the studio and or live, where you're not succumbing all the time. Anyway, here's the bottom line. Alan Toussaint used to, when I interviewed him, he said, you get everything down to a tuner, right? You need a tuner to tune your instrument. He's like, back in the day, we tuned to our heart. He goes, because if you tune that instrument the same way every time, then pretty soon that's how you're operating in all phases of your life. And that's not a healthy thing. So I feel like, I just wanted you to talk a little bit about how you manage the balance between technology and just root authenticity, because Lord knows those Folkways records that you were marinating in when you were a kid, there was like maybe one microphone. That was about it.
I think for me, the studio and the live experience are, equally important. I think I take the recording process very seriously, and I try to when I make an album, I definitely surround myself with the people who I think vibe is going to gel the right way, and I definitely also like having people around that I don't have to kind of tell what to play, that I just sort of
right.
get them in the room.
Right.
And then, but most of the time I tour solo, and it is more of a folk aesthetic, and there's a lot of improv to it, and I really thrive on spontaneity. I really thrive on changing what I'm doing to the temperature of the room. I mean, on that Circles tour, I mean, and this is what usually happens, but more so when I'm the opener. Like, I make a set list, and then it completely changes the minute I get up there. And it's like, it's the kind of thing where it's like it would almost be hard to do with a band, because you have to really be honed in, because I'd be like, nah, this isn't the vibe of the song I think we should do next. I'm going to do this instead, because I'm just reading the temperature of what people are responding to. And it's so important to me to have that interaction with a live audience, and the more intimate, honestly, the better. Like, I think that there's something powerful to big shows, but I think there's got to be some point where, and I think, you read interviews with, any classic band, The Dead, whoever, where they kind of start talking about, like, once you get past a certain size room, you really lose a human connection.
Absolutely.
And I think that, it's like I've seen groups like Wilco and, bands kind of that size, like, play theaters and kind of feel like, okay, this is probably like the perfect experience.
Right.
Like, it is contained. You can control the acoustics. There's still 1,000 people in here, but everybody's kind of like, it's not like, of course, once you get past that, you're making more money and all that, but you're still really only playing to 1,000 people. It's like everything else is sort of like the crowd.
I think it's a really good point. No, I think it's really. One thing about the Dead, I've interviewed Dan Healy a few times. The magic was his ability to sonically expand in the Hartford Civic Center or the Boston Garden, so that it actually could resonate in a larger venue. But I'm obsessed with small theaters, and I think that, just what you did at the, it's a discernible. I guess what I'm saying is, like, also, like, so theoretically, or in truth, you go up with, because I saw your set list. It was like chicken scratch handwriting. I couldn't really read the tunes, but it was.
Yeah.
But it was like, you're telling me that, like, you'll put them in different order or just scrap the whole thing entirely? I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, I still adhere a little bit to an order. Just, really, honestly, from a technical aspect, just because I use a lot of alternate tunings, and it's just, I'm limited to a couple guitars on a lot of these tours, so I just try to, I try to group songs in the same key together, just kind of out of necessity. But having said that, I have, like, I know a handful of covers, and I do, from my own compositions, I've probably got 30 or 40 tunes. So, it's pretty easy for me to never do the same set the same way. I don't even really like when people repeat themselves. I think it's that's the whole point, Now, having said that, I've also done things that are, projects that were kind of like, playing to a film, or, playing with another musician to something that was kind of more synced, to where it's almost kind of like a multimedia thing, and, that's a fixed thing, and you do it the same way every night, almost like a stage play, and I enjoy that too. It's just a completely different headspace.
Well, Mr. Tyler, we have a game on this program called Name That Voice. I don't expect you to know who it is, but I do want you to pay. I do want you to pay attention to the content, and then we'll come back and break it down.
Okay.
Well, there was a lot of it in the beginning. In Chicago, when I didn't go to Chicago to be a musician. I just heard there was good factory work there, and that's the only reason I went to Chicago. I knew nothing about Chicago other than that. And when I got there, I discovered this whole blues scene. Well, I just started hanging out in the clubs, and I wasn't even asking to sit in or telling anybody I played or anything. It came later. But after a while, I was rooming with Big Joe Williams, and he would take me with him to play with him at different places. And then I started playing with people like Johnny Young on the south side, Mike Bloomfield on the north side. And sometimes it was great, and sometimes it was really bleak. When you were working and making some money, if you were getting paid, it was pretty good, But there were big stretches when there was just nothing coming in, and man, I'd be hungry, and it was rough. But I just had to stick with it. I just thought I don't know. I wish I could remember. I wish I had kept a diary or something so I knew what I was really thinking back then. But it's hard to recall all of that. But I know it was rough, and I loved the music and was dedicated to it. Once I could actually see that I could sometimes, make a living, halfway living off of it sometimes. Playing on the street for tips, that was always okay. But back then, it was easy to get a day job, too. Not like, I don't guess it's so easy today, but you could just walk in a factory and they'd give you a broom till they found you something to do. And a lot of guys were like that. Guys like Wolf and Muddy, they had regular 45s coming out and they were touring, and if they weren't touring, they had a home club. They played that all the time in Chicago. And they didn't need to have a day job. But those little blues clubs, they were so small. I mean, they didn't really pay that much money. If you weren't working every night, it was hard to make it without a day job.
Well, that was from my interview with Charlie Musselwhite. Do you know Charlie?
That's who I thought it was. That's what was going to be my guess.
Are you kidding? You were gonna. I should have let you guess it, man. Are you kidding me?
Should have let me guess, Jake. No, that was exactly who I thought you were.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
Wait, so I mean, have you heard him? Have you hung with him? I mean, how did you guess that?
I haven't hung with him. I just something about. Well, first of all, my family's all from Mississippi, so I can usually play some Mississippi accent.
Oh wow! Wow!
And then I was just like scanning my brain. I was like, who would have been with Big Joe Williams and Mike Bloomfield? And I was like, oh, it's got to be Charlie Musselwhite. Anyway.
That is something. It's always the cosmic connection. But I just played that on a whim because I really wanted you to talk to the audience about. Maybe it's self-evident. Maybe you were marinating in it from the childhood stage that you were around the music the whole time, and it was like it just nothing ever else dawned on you. But for Charlie, like he said, he was talking more about like survival. But I really wanted William Tyler to talk about what were your intentions? What are your intentions? What were your intentions for getting into music, and what is the most important thing for you at this point in your career when you're on the bandstand?
My intentions for getting into music, I think, were almost accidental. I took it seriously, but, as a teenager, I didn't think of it. I mean, growing up around the music business, I still didn't think of it as a career option. And, I mean, really, I had started playing guitar in bands when I was in my 20s, and I didn't go back to college. And, you kind of wake up one day, and then you're like in your 30s, and you're like, well, I guess I'm doing this now. That sounds kind of fatalistic, but it's like.
No, it's true, yeah.
It's really just, yeah. I mean, the first tours I went on with bands, and then when I started doing my own stuff and touring it, I never thought about it as making a living. I never thought that was I wouldn't even really think that was an option.
Right.
I always had day jobs, and like, in a way, it was kind of like, I would say there's more freedom at that point in your life. Now you're younger and you have more energy. You can get up and work at a coffee house and wash dishes for 8 hours a day and then go play a gig. But, I think, you have to be careful about where your priorities want certain material things and out of the world and for myself, but I also want to make the music that I want to make. I think that when you're in a position that, like a musician like myself is, where, you're working within the margins of different genres, like, experimental music, jam music, folk music, whatever, none of them are necessarily traditionally commercial outlets.
Absolutely.
So there's never any pressure on me to be like, hey, we think this song of yours is going to, like, be on the radio, or at this point, I mean, just even a Spotify playlist that has a ton of listeners. So it's like, there's kind of an inherent freedom in that, but it also is kind of like he was saying in an interview, I mean, it's really, really hard to make a living. And there's a lot of days, I'm very fortunate. I haven't had a job outside of music in almost 10 years. I'm under no illusion that is going to be something that is perpetual, and I don't have any sort of attitude about it. I don't want to do anything that is rooted in, there's that Quincy Jones interview that came out maybe it was last year,
right,
where he kind of went off the rails. He said a lot of crazy stuff.
Right.
And a lot of it was really profound, but I remember there's this line in it where he said something like, and of course he's, it's probably easy for him to say this because he's made so many of the most successful records ever, but I actually really believed him when he said this. He said, when you start thinking about money, God walks out of the room.
Huh.
And I think that's pretty heavy.
Yeah.
And I have to say I totally agree with that. I think if you're making art thinking about the monetary aspect of it, then it's not even art anymore. I mean, I really believe that. So that's not to say you shouldn't be able to, in different, when you're not putting on, as Jefferson Airplane put it, the crown of creation, you got a different hat on, and you can, your thinking cap, your business cap. I believe it's important as an artist who's an independent artist to also be able to be smart with the money you make, and but those need to be separate things. It's like different suits of clothes, and I don't think they should necessarily interact too much. I think there's a purity in creation and in performance that are really of the time and of the place, and they should be informed by things that are unspoken and largely, not material. And, it's like, I don't know, that there is something very spiritual and very otherworldly about it, and I believe in the power of that as much as I believe in anything.
Were you? Well, I think it's profound, and I think it's spot on. I mean, I'm Quincy's definitely on my bucket list. He's very walled off. So.
Oh yeah, dude, I would love to hear you guys talk.
Yeah, dude, it would be an explosive thing. It would be, but the truth is, I was in a record store here in Tucson the other day, and there's a record like Berkeley Jazz from like 61, and it's Quincy Jones. I'm like, this guy has been doing it for 50 something years.
Oh, yeah.
So he learned.
Yeah.
Not that was a commercial album, but the point is that it's just staggering that he's seen so many changes in music, and he was at the forefront of so much stuff, and yet I think he probably I think he learned from an early age, being around some of the shaman cats like Dizzy and Miles and people like that what you just said, when you forego the artistic endeavor and become consumed with some kind of hook or big hit or radio play or whatever, then the spirit walks out of the room. And and I wonder, I mean, Behold the Spirit came out in 2010. Were you ever at a crossroads where you were sort of offered opportunities to sort of maybe get an advance or make some money, but you'd be doing somebody else, you wouldn't be doing authentically what William Tyler was be channeling musically?
I mean, no is the short answer.
That's good.
I've done sessions. I've definitely played on sessions where it's like,
sure,
I can say I'm not sure I would believe in this. I wouldn't put it on necessarily. I've done library music sessions, that were definitely more about getting paid, but I don't. They're also the kind of things where it's not necessarily my name's not on it. I mean, every time I've made a record, I'll quote William, because I'm just like, how am I going to do that again?
Right.
It just feels like, I genuinely feel like that. Like right now, as of today, I'm like, how am I going to write songs for another record? And I have that. I feel like I'm doing it for the first time every single time I do it. So I guess that implies some kind of purity.
Yeah, no, and I mean, dude, first of all, I think that, you have to take certain gigs. I meant more like as a leader, somebody that, that you have a certain aesthetic. I mean, you're not, I'm just looking here. Again, Wikipedia is Wikipedia, but it looks to me that under your name as a leader, you've done 4 albums. Is that right?
It depends. Yeah, 4 or 5, I think. Yeah.
Right. So I mean, you're not somebody like. There's such a propensity now because people can't play live. There's just a shortage of venues to play live, and obviously there's just this pay-to-play mentality, or sort of like, I don't know, just the music as the significance of music in our culture has changed a lot. But you're not cranking out albums, every few months. You're putting a lot of thought into the actual, artistic part of it, and it's less about whether something's radio friendly or not. When you were listening to the Folkways record, I mean, some of your music, some of the electric stuff, especially strikes at like Gabor Szabo, or kind of like Larry Coryell, like Vanguard Coryell stuff, or even like Ralph Towner, or these are all guys.
Records are huge for me.
Okay, yeah. So explain how, like, just take Towner or Gabor, or like because you were able to incorporate a gypsy feel, but it's not, you're not channeling them directly. It is William Tyler. How did you go about, beg, borrowing, and stealing, but then ultimately finding your own individual voice?
I think if you know how to listen to music, I would say I'm probably better at listening to music than I am at playing it.
So explain it. No, this is really important. How I mean, without letting any of the black magic secrets. So, I mean, how do you listen to music, Tyler?
I think when I really hear something and I'm really listening, and it's not just in the background, I'm actually paying attention to the modality and the composition of it.
Right.
I can really get inside it, and I think if we're just going to talk about kind of vernacular folk music, because I think that's a useful talking point for what we're talking about here, there's a sort of if you're into like the Jungian concept of the collective unconscious,
yes.
I think there's this kind of commonality in drone and modal music that extends from the Middle East to gypsy music, to Indian classical music, to Chinese classical music, to Arab music, to Celtic music, to, American mountain music and early pre-war blues. And, it's like, that is, whatever that thing is, it's like, that's kind of what actually fascinated me with country music early on. It wasn't, traditional country music. It was like, it was like the Carter Family and like the Harry Smith stuff, but
sure.
I was like, wow, not just the fact that the banjo is an instrument that's, it's an African instrument that was co-opted by, white rural Americans.
Absolutely.
But then you're like the dulcimer is supposed to approximate the drone of the bagpipe, but then if you play but it also sounds like a bouzouki, which also sounds like an oud, which sounds like a sitar, and it's just like, that I think there's a weird modal commonality to world folk music that I think it's like the artists who I would respect the most, whether you're talking about Gabor or in folk music somebody like John Fahey, or in jazz, obviously guys like Alice and John Coltrane and Miles, and I don't know. I see an interconnectedness there.
I think you're really getting close to this inner truth. Alice Coltrane, the harp, you got off on that, the harp or piano playing. Yeah, I mean, to me,
both. Yeah.
I mean, geez, that was so. I mean, because I was going to say you're listening to these Folkways records, but were you also? I mean, Folkways did a heck of a job doing field recordings in Mali and India and
oh, sure, yeah, no, I mean, I love that stuff. I mean, I like from an early age that kind of stuff fascinated me so much. But I think what was interesting was that as I got into more kind of psychedelic and out there stuff, there's like that Sonny Chirac album Black Woman?
Sure.
It's like him and Eiler like with Eiler, just straight up, it's like just a recontextualization of like Dixieland jazz.
Right.
And with Shreddy Chirac, it's like I'm hearing these folk melodies that almost sound like Appalachian or African or something, some like just pre-modern thing, but they're channeled through this really loud electric guitar, and it's like I don't know. That's just what I'm like. I think that's what when I heard those kind of like that. I hesitate to call it jazz, but like that kind of music we're talking about. I immediately was like, oh, this is like what I identified with when I was into like listening to all these crazy folkways records when I was a kid. Like this is the same spiritual tonal aspect.
Did you? No, I think it's incredibly well put. I mean, did you like? When did you get hip to guys like Bloomfield and some of the guys that were sort of transplants into that Bay Area melting pot? I mean, there's just David Lindley is another guy that the band Kaleidoscope that he was in.
Oh yeah.
He was playing bazoo. Yeah, they were playing like Straight No Chaser in like 11/9 or something. It was like, and it was this same kind of droning, modal. Like I was just talking to the Fish, Barry Melton. I crashed with him for a couple of days up in Sacramento when I saw you guys, and he said, because the Country Joe and the Fish, they always they shared bills with the Kaleidoscope. He's like, you couldn't dance to that music, and I'm sure he's right to a degree, but you know what? I think I'd be all right because I could dance to anything, man. I love the odd time signature.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like I just want to let the body dance. So to me, it's like, I mean, at a certain point, how do you allow influences into your zeitgeist now? I mean, I remember talking to Dan Horn, at the Mullis Surf Shop a couple months ago, and he was like talking about Cass McCombs as a songwriter, as a lyricist. Cass doesn't really listen to other lyricists because he doesn't want to be influenced by them. And I'm just curious about, for you, that was the coolest thing, by the way, was just the idea that like you were just playing instrumental music, which I just love. I was kind of half expecting with the mic there that you were going to start singing, but I just love the fact that it was all instrumental. But how do you allow, I guess the simpler way to say it is, what do you listen to today? What are you getting off on today? And how are you still evolving your sound?
Well, I'd say my go-to, I always gravitate back towards classical and jazz.
Yeah.
And I would say I'm at a personal crossroads a little bit, and I've frankly been having pretty significant writer's block this year, where like I'll start tunes and I'll be like, I don't know, this sounds like something else I already did. I've been listening to a lot more like kind of ambient electronic music.
Sure.
And just like, for lack of a better term, new age music.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in space and not being afraid of space. I think a lot of I tend to towards compositionally, like, and arrangement wise, like a lot of density. And I think whatever I do next, I really want it to be a lot more open. So, I mean, I can identify with pretty much any musical instrument, especially if it's in a solo or trio context, and like it's a trio record. I'm trying to think of who else is on it. It's
who's the leader on it?
Jimmy Jeffrey? Is that how you say his name?
Oh my God! Wait, hold on for a second. Which one? No, dude, this is because this may not be the one, but this is insane, Tyler, because I did a couple interviews with Steve Swallow, and he talked about Jufre's road to Damascus. He was playing very straight ahead music, and then he went to see Ornette. And then all of a sudden he wanted to play free, and pretty soon it was, and this may or may not be the trio record you're talking about, it was drummerless. It was Paul Bley, Swallow, and Jufrey. And it's insane free music, And I mean, there's a couple. I'm going to tell you. I'm going to send you a couple things that maybe may or may not do it for you. But I'm pretty sure you may or may not have heard it. But I think it'll give you opportunities to go into. Are you familiar with Harry Parch?
Of course.
Okay, so I mean, your bag is really deep. Okay, so I mean, and then there's some other stuff like some more like. Anyway, I'll just send you a few things to listen to. But yeah, I mean, I guess the best thing to do with the writer's block is like, I can totally respect the fact of listening to what you're hearing in your head and saying, I kind of did that, or I don't know about that. I actually wouldn't stress about it so much. I think that. Maybe you're at a point now where, okay, there's a little bit of, there's a little bit of block right now. And then when that wall comes down, it's just, you're going to be like saturated with content and you're not going to know what to do with all of it, I mean, it's
That's
just.
what I'm hoping.
So I underestimated William Tyler's ability to auditorily understand when he picked out Charlie Musselwhite. So we got one more Name That Voice, and I'm not gonna say that you will not get it. I think you might get this one, and we'll come back and break it down.
Okay.
And it's really frightening to think about a life without being able to play music or sing. I definitely do not want to ever have to answer that question. That sounds like one of the worst situations that I could ever be in. So, playing and singing, man, it was of absolute desperate importance to me when I was a kid, to get me. I mean, that's what, rock and roll, the best rock and roll guitar players all have that, like
Yes.
Johnny Thunders,
Mm-hmm.
Paul Kossoff, I mean, you could just look at those guys, and I'm one of them. Like, they're just some knuckleheads, the Young Brothers and AC/DC, Keith, that's part of what makes, I mean, Jerry Garcia, Bob Weir, he said it, he said it himself. I worked on his movie. I heard the quotes. I mean, we're just people who just have to do this and are quite tunnel visioned about it. And we remain that tunnel visioned about it well into adulthood, so that part of us never truly grows up,
You want to take a guess who that is?
No, I'll admit I'm stumped on that. Who's that?
That is the late, great Neil Casal.
Wow.
And that was from my interview with him from June of 2017. And I really, when I saw you up on the bandstand, I said, well, his spirit is here and you are one of the torchbearers. Not that you're anything like him as a musician, but just the vibe and the light and the spirit was there. And really, I played him an audio clip of my interview with Krishna Das. Do you know Krishna Das? He's the Hindu chanter.
I'm not super familiar, but I've heard that.
Right. Well, it's fine. The point is that we had these really intense interviews where he was talking about when he lost his guru Maharaji in India, and he went through some very, very, very dark times, and he was actually on the verge of taking his own life. Krishna Das was, and then he got hit by this lightning bolt in his apartment one day in like 1994. That basically said, if you do not sing with people, that is your mission. You must chant with people. And he slowly went to the ashram, and where he is today is quite remarkable in his career. But he basically told me, it was very enlightening. As a non-musician, not as a non-professional musician, I often thought, I'm like, it's really great. Musicians are always looking for that state of bliss. And Krishna Das told me, he goes, I don't sing for bliss. I sing to fucking live. And basically, Neil Casal, in that little clip there, was talking about this tunnel vision, this need to create. And so I ask you, I mean, if you didn't have music, William Tyler, would your soul die?
I think you would just have to find a different avenue of creativity. I mean, you know, I don't. I think I have tunnel vision as a creative. I mean, you know, a couple of things. First of all, I'm realizing that's actually the first time I've ever heard Neil's voice.
Wow, that's
really heavy.
That's really heavy.
I didn't know him personally. We were like, we might have emailed a few times before that Circles tour, but we never actually crossed paths personally. And
wow.
Even though we had all these mutual friends and blah 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 blah, you know, you take that stuff for granted when somebody's around.
Sure.
So that's heavy.
Wow, I feel very well. I feel he's looking down on us right now, man. That's cool.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I would say, you know, like you know, it's interesting him talking about tunnel vision. I mean, he's such a good photographer as well, and I think a real creative soul. I mean, obviously he was the epitome of that. You find different avenues for it. So if music, let's say, you know, I was living in some dystopia where, you know, like one of those like Styx albums where like rock and roll is outlawed, you know, I would just find another avenue. I would be, you know, visual art or, you know, making movies or writing poetry or, I mean, like I would create. Yeah. Like if I couldn't create, yes, my soul would die, you know, or my material body would die before the soul would. But I definitely, whatever I'm in this world to do as a living, I don't really even care that much. I just know that I have to be a creative. I have to be able to have some amount of freedom to live that kind of life. And I would make a lot of material and personal sacrifices in order for that to be a reality for the rest of my life, however long I'm here.
It ties back to the original thing about intentions and you know, for getting into music and what your intentions are. And I mean, when you go through something like as a creative and you're going through kind of a writing block, like you said, Neil was a great photographer. Do you have other well, I think here's the other thing. The part of the audio that I didn't play you was he finished it by, because I asked him. I said I played him the Krishna Das quote, and he went on this long riff, and then at the end he told this story. Neil did about going to Ann Arbor, Michigan, and you know, living in a freezing barn, playing in a rock and roll band, stealing. You know, cans of soup from a Total station, okay? And so this is where he was at, and you know, there was a lot of culture. It was University of Michigan. Every day he'd be walking around. There'd be restaurants and shops and record stores that he'd be, you know, going into and checking out, and he was walking around with his peers who were at the time in academia, and he said it never once dawned on him that is what he should have been doing. He goes, that's how badly I wanted to do this, is to play music. He goes, it never dawned on me until later in my life when I had some hindsight of how absolutely insane. I mean, that's how badly he wanted it, was that at his age, when he could have gone to college like everybody else and followed this sort of formulaic path, he was living in a freezing barn, stealing soup. And the point is that, you know, I don't think you made it through the school of Nashville. You dropped out of school, and I maybe that's true or not, but I'm wondering about that, the calling for William Tyler, that calling for music. I mean, like you said, you'd pick up a day job in a heartbeat just to be able to create, but were you ever in that position where now that you have a little more hindsight, you were like, wow, that's how badly I really wanted to create music?
When you're 21, or I mean, you're a child, you know.
Right.
But like, and yeah, like you just go. I mean, I was kind of fortunate in that, like, I started to play with older musicians when I was about 20, 21, you know.
Right.
And going on tour a lot and sort of growing up in that environment. But like, yeah, I mean, there was a point probably in my early mid-20s where I was like, I should probably go to school now, and it was just like, because I thought, and when I was in high school, before I got really, really serious about music, I mean, as a vocation, I mean, I was like, I wanted to go to school and be a history teacher. And I don't know what, it's definitely like, I mean, it's not the glamour that hooks you, but there is something about the freedom where you're just like, I don't want to ever not have this freedom. I just I don't care what that looks like.
Right.
And I won't be, and I've tried to make an oath to myself that I try to make responsible decisions about, money, material things, people, in relationships. And a lot of these things do suffer because of that. But, I mean, and maybe it's being selfish, but I see the way you can glide through this world. And, for me, travel is almost like a spiritual experience. Like, I really need that. I need to ramble and travel and have that be a part of my existence. And, even if you're not doing it in any sort of way that's comfortable, I don't care. I just want to experience as much of the world as I can, because life is short, and at least on this planet. And
it is.
You want to live in Technicolor. Once you've seen it's like the Wizard of Oz. Even once you've seen Technicolor, you don't want to go back to black and white.
Well, no, I mean you're preaching to the choir, man. I mean, I think the insecure way truly is the secure way. I wonder, as we wrap up part one here with William Tyler, I don't know if you were ever hip to the Amazing Rhythm Aces. They did the
not a little bit. I mean, yeah.
They had the pop that pop hit Third Rate Romance, but they were a badass group.
Right.
I mean, they were great. James Hooker was a white cat who was playing on all of Al Green's records on the High label. It was insane. But Russell Smith was the leader, and he left us this year. But I did an interview with him, and he was just talking about Nashville, or what he termed as Nash Vegas. And, he basically said that, they're dressing cats up to look like cowboys, but they're not real cowboys. It's not Merle, Haggard, and Willie and Waylon. The point is that it's a lot more about the superficiality of it, how you look, how you present yourself, and this goes across all spectrums of music and a lot of pop music as well. And I'm wondering if how you how you balance or whether if you move to Los Angeles because you think it was a more authentic musical environment than Nashville. Because Nashville was a recording capital. It still kind of is, but it's just so cutthroat now. And there's just, there's like 7 dudes that have lockdown on everything, And I know it was... Yeah. You riff on that.
There is. But I mean, there's also... I mean, I think you could say that about... there's really, if we're going to be really honest about it, there's 3 music business centers. There's New York, Los Angeles, and Nashville, at least in America.
Sure.
Maybe Austin's kind of in the mix. I don't know. But I think those 3 cities, I think in Nashville, I mean, yeah, it's competitive and there's a lot of artifice, but there's also a lot of really legitimate people in it. I feel like LA is just that times 1,000. It's just like an incredibly more diverse, interesting city. I mean, I moved here not necessarily for some sort of authenticity. I just moved here because I wanted to live in a big city with lots of people who didn't think or look or play like me, and I just got to a feeling that I grew up in Nashville, and it's a comfortable place, and I might end up back there, but I wanted to be around. I just wanted to be around a lot of. I don't know. I mean, you can find anything you want in Los Angeles. You can find anything you don't want too. I think Nashville's just it still has a small town mentality. Even as it becomes a city of maybe 1 million people, it's still kind of as cutthroat and competitive, and as all that exists within the context of the show business scene there, it's still a relatively just geographically and population-wise, it's a very small place. And, so that's, there's kind of a myopic aspect of getting lost in Nashville that I guess I just needed to get away from, whether or not I end up back there or not, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. You still have the 615 area code, but I think you're.
I'm never gonna get rid of that, dude. That's I'm a
No, I think you're right where you need to be. I mean, every time I go to LA, I feel the same way you do. I think there's something for everybody. There's anything kind of goes, and it's the full gambit from like the cheesiest pop music to authentic world music to the psychedelicized cats that that I just saw you with, and it was just to me it's very cathartic at 41 after 8 years on the radio interviewing mainly graybeards to really discover my generation, my peers, and people that are going to continue the lineage of the music. I didn't know what it was if it was there before, but because of people like Neely and Farmer Dave and Dan Horn and William Tyler, I realize now that things are stronger than ever. And man, it was let me know when you're. I told you before, man. I really want to see you with a rhythm section. So, I mean, in any of please hit me when you got gigs out. If you ever come to Arizona or you got gigs in LA, just. Send me a wave, man. I'd love to come out and see you. I had a ball. It was great to catch you on the road, man, at Ramble on Rose,
Likewise, Jake. I really appreciate the time.
Yeah, man. I'll get this up later tonight and keep doing it, brother. Much love to you, man.
You too, bud.
All right.
Lots of love.
All right. Later on.
Bye.
Peace. Just another whistle stop. William Tyler, fantastic cat. Keep doing it, baby. That's it for the Jake Feinberg Show, and we'll be back tomorrow.